What's a gesture? How does practicing gestures help you improve your anatomy skills? And most importantly, how do you even draw a gesture? I'll explain all of this step by step in the rest of the video. Hey everyone, I'm Mobin, and today I'm going to show you a super important skill to practice before diving into anatomy. We're talking about gesture drawing. What it is, how to draw it, and how to practice it like a pro. So grab your pencils, get comfortable, and let's get started. In simple terms, a gesture is all about flow and movement. It's the energy and direction you feel when you look at something. Think of it like the rhythm or vibe of an object. Everything around us has a natural flow that we pick up on, even without realizing it. For example, check out this mountain. Doesn't it seem to have a flow like this? Now look at this ocean wave. You can feel the curve and movement, right? And this spiral tower? Its flow is pretty obvious too. So yeah, everything in the world has its own flow, and in drawing, we call that flow gesture. All right, now that we know gesture means flow, let's talk about one super important tip in gesture drawing. Picture these squares in your mind. Do you notice the spiral movement they have? That's the flow we're talking about. Now imagine drawing these squares. If you simply outline the shape of the squares, that's technically wrong in gesture drawing. Why? Because in gesture drawing, you don't start with the object itself. You start with its flow. So instead of outlining the squares, you should first capture their spiral movement and then build the squares based on that flow. This approach is key in gesture drawing. Don't just copy shapes. Capture their energy and rhythm. This is super important, so make sure you jot it down. All right, now let's get into some practical examples. We'll start with this one. The key thing here is to imagine the gesture in your mind first, then analyze it, and finally draw what you feel. The idea is to understand how the gesture flows. It's really not as complicated as it sounds. Just capture the flow, and that's it. To make things easier, grab a timer. Try to finish each gesture in under 4 minutes. Once you get better at it, challenge yourself with shorter times. 2 minutes, 1 minute, or even 30 seconds. Remember, you're not drawing detailed characters right now. You're simply focusing on the asterisk gesture. Keep it loose, simple, and full of movement. When you're looking at something to draw its gesture, start by figuring out its longest flow, or axis. For example, in this image, the longest axis is shaped like a C curve. Don't worry, you don't need to overthink this. Just imagine the axis in your head and use it as a guide to capture the overall flow. Now keep in mind, not every shape can be simplified into just one axis. That's why we use C, S, and I lines. Use C lines when you feel a simple curved flow. Use S lines for more dynamic or wavy curves. Use I lines for straight sections. These are your tools for breaking down any form into gestures. Trust your instincts, focus on the feeling of the flow, and keep it simple. Following this approach will make your gesture drawings much more accurate and fluid. All right, now we'll wrap up the gesture by sketching the two hands. Like I mentioned earlier, I've used two I-shaped lines of pinterest here because they best capture the smooth, curved feeling of the hands in this case. Usually, I'd go for S-shaped lines. When drawing hands, since they often have a natural wave, but here, the I lines do a better job of showing that flow. These little details might seem small, but they make a big difference when it comes to capturing the energy and feel of the gesture. So always pay attention to what kind of line works best for the part you're drawing. All right, let's start with the head. When I'm practicing gestures, I usually keep it simple and draw the head as an oval. There are, of course, a bunch of ways to draw the head, but since we're focusing on the flow of the body, I don't stress too much about making the head perfect. If you want something more precise, though, you can try the Loomis method. It's super effective and helps you nail the proportions of the head. Next, I'll move on to the neck and shoulders. I start by outlining both sides of the neck to make things easier, and then I align the shoulders using an imaginary guideline. Keeping it loose and focusing on the flow is key here. Let's keep going. All right, now I'll mark a dot to show where the chest area of the body starts. Like I mentioned earlier, when drawing gestures, It's all about capturing what you feel, not necessarily copying what the body looks like exactly. For instance, here I feel like the upper body has a C-shaped curve. You probably see it too, right? So I'll draw that flow in a C shape, stopping where the upper and lower body meet. Now for the lower body. Here I feel a bit of a reverse C shape, almost like a mix of a circle and a C shape. I'll follow that flow to keep things consistent. And finally, we'll move on to sketching the arms and legs. Let's keep it smooth and natural. All right, let's take the left leg as an example. If you look closely, the left thigh is pretty straight with almost no curve, right? So the best way to show that is by using an I-shaped line. It does a great job of showing straightness. The same goes for the lower part of the leg. It's also mostly straight like an I line has, but it's angled slightly more. So here too, I'll use an asterisk I line to capture that feeling. Now, if you're worried about how to draw the foot, don't stress too much. Like I said about the head, I don't go into too much detail for the feet either. You can keep it simple. Maybe draw it as a rectangular block. But don't forget, it's still part of the body and the gesture. So make sure to draw what you feel. For the right leg, you'll want to stick with S or C lines for sure. Now let's talk about the arms. If you take a closer look at the right arm, you'll see that the forearm, upper arm, and even the hand all have a pretty straight feel to them. So using I lines works best for the right arm. As for the left arm, both the upper arm and hand have a curved feel, so C lines are the way to go. The forearm on the left side, though, is a mix of I and C lines. And hey, don't stress about getting the gesture perfect on your first try. It's totally normal. The key is to keep drawing, practicing, and improving little by little. With time, you'll get the hang of it. All right, this time I'm starting with the head again, but instead of using an oval like before, I'm going to try the Loomis method. This way, I can show you how to use the Loomis method for gestures when drawing the head. Of course, it's totally up to you. You don't have to do it this way. Personally, I still prefer the simple oval method. Next, I move on to the neck, drawing its line to connect things. If you pay attention, the shoulder line here isn't straight. It's a bit tilted and slanted. So I'm sketching the shoulder line with a slight slant to match the gesture. Here, we're going to draw the upper body. If you look at the reference, you can really feel that C shape in the upper body. It's curved and bent in that position, and I'm sure you see it too. So the best way to capture the gesture here is by using C-shaped lines. Start with the C curve and carry it down to the middle of the body where the legs begin. Now, since gesture drawing is all about flow and lines, let's move on to the lower body, starting with the right leg. If you look closely, you can sense a faint S-curve in the right leg. It's subtle, but it's there. That slight curve is what we're going to follow for the right leg. When we get to the foot, just draw it like a simple rectangular cube. Don't overthink or stress about the details of the foot here. The goal is to capture the feeling of the gesture, not perfect anatomy. Keep in mind that this rectangular cube needs to follow the flow of the gesture. It might be shorter in some areas and longer in others depending on the position of the foot. So just keep it simple and let the flow guide you. All right, let's break this down. The left leg is pretty straightforward, just two simple I-shaped lines. But now, let's focus on the hands. Starting with the left hand, I personally feel it has a C shape. I'm not sure if you see it the same way, but take a moment to really feel the pose. If you put yourself in the position of the reference, you'll notice the left hand is bent, and that curve gives it a nice C shape. Now let's look at the right hand. If you pay attention, you'll see that it's more broken, meaning it's made of two straight I-shaped lines. So for the right hand, I-shaped lines are the best choice to capture that feeling. Here's the key thing to remember. When you're drawing a gesture, don't focus on the object itself. Instead, imagine being in the reference's position and try to capture how the pose feels. Gesture drawing isn't about creating a perfect, detailed drawing. It's a quick and loose exercise that helps you improve your understanding of anatomy, body flow, and form. So don't worry about the details. Just go with the flow. Oh, and one more important thing. If you enjoyed learning about gestures and want to dive deeper into the topic, I've got a really helpful video, so don't miss this. My name is Mobin, and if you found this video useful, don't forget to subscribe.